It is one of the most jarring decisions in biblical history. Israel's greatest future king voluntarily surrendering to his sworn enemies. This moment from 1 Samuel chapter 27 serves as the foundation for a practical devotional study. It exposes exactly what happens when our faith runs out. To understand the decision, we have to look at the harsh reality of David's life up to this point. He has spent years on the run, hunted relentlessly across brutal, unforgiving wilderness by King Saul. The exhaustion is absolute. Verse 1 reveals his psychological breaking point. David looks at his circumstances and tells himself, "I will be destroyed one day by the hand of Saul." He calculates his odds using pure human logic and concludes his situation is hopeless. In his panic, he makes a life-altering choice to flee to Philistia. And noticeably absent from this entire process is any mention of him consulting God. What happens when a believer abandons God's promises for the sake of a logical shortcut? David's next 16 months would reveal exactly what it costs to maintain that artificial safety. David arrives in enemy territory with 600 men and immediately strikes a political alliance with Achish, the Philistine king of Gath. At first glance, the shortcut seems to work perfectly. Achish rewards David's defection by granting him the remote city of Ziklag. David finally has a home, safety from Saul, and a chance to rest. But living under enemy protection requires rent. To justify his presence and maintain his safety, David has to prove his ongoing military value to the Philistine crown. David launches brutal raids south against non-Israelite tribes, but he tells Achish he attacked his own people in Judah. The deception secures the total trust of King Achish, who now believes David is permanently hated by the Israelites. This is the hidden nature of the rational shortcut. The safety David built requires constant maintenance, forcing him to tell larger and larger lies to keep the entire arrangement from collapsing. To protect his lie, David commits a severe atrocity. He slaughters everyone in the targeted towns, men and women, so that no survivors can ever make it to Gath and expose his true raiding paths to the king. The man described as being after God's own heart is now acting as a ruthless warlord. A single decision born out of fear has mutated into unimaginable violence. Eventually, the trap snaps shut. David's deception was so convincing that when Achish rallies the Philistine army for a massive new campaign, he commands David to march beside him. The target of this new campaign is King Saul. David is now marching to war against his own Israelite brethren. His attempt at self-rescue has cornered him into a nightmare scenario. If he fights for the Philistines, he destroys his own people. If he turns against Achish in the battle, he and his men will be wiped out. Human logic has left him with zero viable options. 1 Samuel 29 opens with David marching toward the battlefield, trapped deep within the enemy ranks. There is no human way out of this dilemma. This is exactly where God's sovereign intervention overrides David's mistakes. God doesn't use a lightning bolt or a parting sea. Instead, he uses the sharp political paranoia of the other Philistine commanders. Seeing David in the ranks, the commanders are furious. They refuse to march into battle with a Hebrew who could easily turn on them to win back Saul's favor. They force Achish to send David away immediately. Through this simple political dispute, God actively prevents David from slaughtering his own people. He remains faithful to his chosen king, honoring his promises even when David had completely forgotten them. God's protection is entirely capable of outmaneuvering our flawed human logic, quietly rescuing us from the disastrous corners we back ourselves into. But David's detour still has consequences. He and his men march back to Ziklag, only to find the city burned to the ground and their families taken captive by the Amalekites. Standing in the ashes, listening to his own grieving men talk about stoning him, David hits rock bottom. Every piece of security he tried to manufacture through logic and deception is completely shattered. And right here, finally, the running stops. In the middle of the ruin, the scriptures say David found strength in the Lord his God. He repents and turns back to the only true source of stability. The smoking ruins of Ziklag highlight the danger of fear-driven logic. When we begin calculating our survival based only on what we can see, we often end up building the very traps we were trying to escape. Real safety is not found in the perfect human shortcut, but in the bedrock of God's promises, an anchor that holds firm regardless of how desperate the surrounding landscape appears. Sometimes God permits the fragile, self-made plans we build to burn down, but He does it so that, standing in the ashes, we are driven back to the true source of our strength.